The first duty of government is to protect our rights.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government in what we were tasked to do.
In the Idaho Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, we have a right to life, we have a right to defend life.
This legislation is centered on meeting the needs of Idaho families.
And we have no way to maintain control over the spending of this program, and it will be a disaster for this state long term.
But we have a whole gamut of kids whose parents would like to do something for them and they cannot.
The courts have long held that our ability to transfer title on real property benefits society as a whole.
This is simply about putting it out of reach of young, innocent, vulnerable children and making our libraries and schools a safe place for them to go.
And I am increasingly frustrated that we cannot stop ourselves from drinking at the public trough.
He's sounding the alarm. He's saying if we don't address these issues, we potentially might have greater problems moving forward.
I feel like we're back to an unappointed board that gets to decide who is essential and who is non-essential.
If I was looking at a business and I was looking at these figures, there would be heads rolling because this is unsustainable.
We're supposed to be bottom-up government. We're supposed to be representing my citizens' ideas and your citizens' ideas, and we're supposed to be discussing them and debating them to come to a conclusion.
And for me, it's about a couple things. It's about food security, it's about national security, and it's about preserving American exceptionalism.
The First Amendment and our freedom of religion, freedom of speech are our first liberties. They are so important. We don't have the rest without them.
State Affairs Committee. My position was leave the March primary election in place. And I voted accordingly. And I lost. That's what happens sometimes when we're here in the Senate. And ultimately, this body determined that it's better to combine the primary into a May joint primary between the legislature and the presidential election. And I believe, as I understand the fiscal note, the implications of that were to save taxpayer money. And I think that's where that's coming from. Had you asked me a year ago to support this particular bill, I don't know if I would have been there. Because as I told you, I had a position and it was something in line with my constituents, and so there it was. I don't believe this bill undermines the authority of my party. Why? Because the law is, just as has been described, it's up to the party. The party can decide no matter what we do here. We don't decide whether they have a caucus or a primary election. The party decides whether they have a primary election or a caucus. That is not up to the legislature. What is up to the legislature is to decide whether or not we will provide the opportunity to the party to have a primary election as opposed to a caucus. And for me, that is the question that I'm presented today. Am I going to provide to the voters of my district an opportunity for a primary presidential election as opposed to the current state of things now, which is that there is none? And by the way, that is not a problem of this Senate. This Senate voted to have a presidential primary election. They made that very clear. It's all on the record. This body said we should have a presidential primary election. That did not make it across the body of on the opposite side of the rotunda. So as I said, if I were asked, a year ago, would I support an April? Probably not. But let me tell you what's happened in my district. I've done just a little bit better than the senator who has spoken on the floor, because in my district, we had a turnout of 5.9% in the presidential caucus. 5.9. Now, I haven't seen that on paper. This is what my Central Committee chairman tells me. 5.9. I don't believe that's good for Idaho. I can tell you as a certainty, my constituents don't like that. And my constituents don't like that they don't get a chance to go to the polls. And my constituents don't like that people who are serving this country overseas don't get a chance to participate. And my constituents don't like that when you're a person who cannot sit through, whether you're in a nursing home, whatever your situation is, you're a mother with children, you have to work that day, you're a peace officer who is on duty, you don't get to participate in the caucus. They don't like it. And I agree with them. And so here I am faced with the vote, contrary to the position I was in last time, asked whether or not I would vote to give my constituents an opportunity for a presidential primary. My vote is yes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Sarah Carlson.
I have a concern that we will be confused about how to work through a session when we're thinking about running for election in April. It's hard enough as it is to stay focused on what we're doing here in the Senate. I do not want to be focused on a re-election campaign when we're headed for a primary in April. I believe that I was very successful in winning my office because I had a month head start on my opponent. And is that what we want to do? I mean, it's great if we want new, fresh people every couple of years, and we might, but we need to be focusing on what the people want for Idaho. And that means that we need to be sitting here in the Capitol working and not focusing on a re-election. Therefore, my vote will be no. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Den Hartog.
Thank you, Mr. President. Several of us were here many years ago when we were asked to consider separating the presidential primary election from the standard primary election in May. And I remember the struggle that our body had with that. And I, for one, was apprehensive about separating the two elections. Over the course of, I think about 10 years and a few election cycles where we had the March presidential primary separate from our primary elections and other local offices, I think it worked well. I think the particular trial of what we have gone through last year and now walking through the caucus process for the majority party this last week, I think we understand the importance and how much. I don't think any one of us would say, we have constituents who don't want to participate in a presidential primary election. I really had struggled with my vote that many, many years ago, particularly around the cost issue. But I've become convinced that having the two separate is fine and that it works well. This Senate did take up the issue, as the senator from 27 mentioned last year. And we are all on record as identifying that we want a presidential primary and that we want our constituents to have that opportunity because that's what they've told us loud and clear that they want. I think, now I can't remember which senator said it, but a senator from 4 identified that this is a compromise that really doesn't solve any of the problems. And that's where I find myself today, and I am not able to be in support of 1371. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Ricks, you have the floor.
To debate in favor.
You got it.
Senators, this is an interesting issue, and I look at it from a couple of different viewpoints. First and foremost,
All right, we are now listening to live debate on the Senate floor of Senate Bill 1371, which you can see right there. It combines the local and legislative primary elections that normally happen in May with a now currently non-existent presidential primary that normally had happened in March. It combines those two to have one primary election in April. If you are a viewer of this show and you're engaged in the voting process, you should know exactly where we are right now. We don't have a primary for president for any party. The parties themselves are in control of that at the moment. And as you saw, as we opened here, Senator Anthon was talking about how even if they do pass this, it's up to the parties whether or not they want to partake in it. We're going to continue listening to this debate here. This is Senator Ricks. Sounds like he's debating in favor of the bill. We've got a lot of stuff on deck today, but let's go back live and listen to some more of this debate, and we'll be back.
Droves, if there's a high-level presidential campaign and you try to get them to come back a couple of months later, and they don't show up. It's a very small, dismal amount. And, that's one race, the presidential race. It's very high level. We want to get the right person there from Idaho, but there's an awful lot of legislative races and other races throughout the state that we just have a very small vote. And I think it's important that if we merge those together, we're going to have a much higher vote. We're going to get more of the will of the people for our candidates, which I think is good for Idaho and good for us too in the long run. So I will be supporting this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Harris, you have the floor to debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Debate in favor of the bill.
Go ahead.
Senators, this legislature and others has made a point to eliminate election dates, consolidate election dates through the years. We eliminated a date with the tax bill. We've got another tax bill that has the same proposal to consolidate election dates. I think this bill is a good bill. It helps consolidate elections to two. It helps prevent confusion with voters so they know when they're going to vote. And it saves the taxpayer money for elections and will help the county clerks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Hart.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's only been 6 days since we had the presidential caucus, and for me, I need to debrief some people. I need to talk to party leadership. I need to talk to the people in my county. I want to know how they felt that process went. So I think it's premature to make a change based on not having been able to really evaluate our experience with the caucus. Another point I want to make is the next presidential election is in 2028. So we have time. We don't have to rush through this. We can give this some more time. And if I could make a motion to hold the bill to next year, I would, but I don't think that's in the rules. So I will just have to vote no, and I think we can bring this back another year when we have better information. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate the bill.
Senator Zeiderfeld, you have the floor to debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have to wonder if we really have talked to our constituents. Does this really fit for them? They are our main people that we're concerned about here. And I personally haven't had time with this coming out to actually reach out and see what they are concerned about. Because when it comes down, it's not about the party, it's not about us, it's about them. And right now, we have been all over the place with our elections. And their trust in us is very low where our elections are concerned. And because I get a lot of that information from them. We did not have the perfect scenario for the caucus, but I have to say that the caucus that I joined in was very successful, and the people actually really had a good time at our Twin Falls caucus there. And looking at the dates, so when you look in January, we are just coming into session, and we have to know right away if we're going to run in January. And then we have to look again in April. But those are not the best dates even for our constituents, because January is just coming out of Christmas and all the holidays for a lot of people. And so they're not going to be thinking along that process. And then in April is tax season. And so is that really going to be the best date. You know, we're thinking for voter turnout. You know, those are some things that they're going to be thinking about. That's going to be on their minds at that time. And so then we're thinking about the voter turnout. Well, it's been pretty evident that the voter turnout is always bigger in a presidential year. But on the opposite years, it's not that big of a turnout. I think our biggest thing that we really need to be considering is what is best for them. How do we engage them? Because we're always concerned about getting our constituents and people out there to vote. The main thing that we need to do, and part of what I feel my duty and job is, to make sure that I include them and engage them and encourage them to show up to vote, because a lot of countries will spend days in line just to vote. And here we're trying to consider, you know, bring it in and the cost and everything, but this is the number one thing that is the most important to our constitutional republic, is our voting. I think if we have to spend just a little bit more there or whatever, but we need to do whatever we can for our constituents to make sure that we protect that. That is part of our duty to do that. And I think that this bill coming in at this time, it was kind of brought up quick, in my opinion, and there wasn't a lot of discussion about it, and then held for a long time. But I think, again, the number one people that we should consider when we are making this vote is our constituents, and then keep in mind our constitutional republic and how we can protect that as well in our elections. So I will be voting against this.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate the bill.
Senator Foreman, you have the floor to debate the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Moving Idaho's presidential primary to well into April essentially relegates Idaho's primary to the level of a national afterthought. What's that going to do to voter turnout if essentially the outcome of that presidential primary's pretty much already been determined? That's not going to encourage people to come out and vote. Also, I think a lot of the low turnout numbers that we saw, Mr. President, is because of voter apathy. Certainly, caucus versus primary does affect the turnout, and I agree with the comments that it almost disenfranchises certain people who are handicapped, can't make it to a caucus, people who are on active duty overseas, and that's a concern. But I think a lot of what we're seeing in the low primary turnout numbers or low caucus turnout numbers is just voter apathy. Now, of course, that's a different subject. This bill really can't cure that. That's a whole different topic. But I'm against this bill because I think it pushes our primary too far down the road and kind of takes us out of the national limelight, and that will hurt voter participation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate a second time.
Is there anyone that wishes to debate the bill for the first time?
Mr. President, to debate
Senator
for the
Nichols,
first time.
to debate for the first time, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to bring out just what's been said. This is a great debate, but one thing I wanted to just bring to the attention is I think this also does things with our electioneering and with the electioneering commission. If we move this to April, then I believe that the electioneering commission window opens a month earlier, and so that would put it around March 16th. And so any mention of a candidate would become, in essence, electioneering. And I'm not sure how that would play out with the legislative session going on, as well as initially campaigning going on. So that's one thing that does concern me, because we know there's been some recent electioneering issues that have been taking place that have been under investigation. And so I'm not quite sure how it would be, how that would play out during the legislative session. So I just wanted to bring that into the limelight as a thought. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted a May election. I like consolidated elections. This is the bill that is in front of us. And to provide a presidential primary is critical. It's critical to turnout, and it's critical to the trust in the process. It's interesting, I look back at 2016, and I've been opposed to the presidential primary. I voted no my first year to fund the presidential primary as a member of the majority. I knew what this was going to do. It was going to decrease voter turnout. And in 2016, in my district in Payette County, we had almost a 78% voter turnout for the presidential primary that first year. It was exciting. People were energized. They wanted to come out to the polls. And then a couple of months later, we had barely 15% voter turnout. So every other election cycle, we have our statewide races, and that brings people out. And some might argue, well, then during the presidential year, we should have better candidates. We should have better legislative candidates to motivate people. Idahoans expect that they can mark that ballot. I think this bill strikes a really good balance. I'm less interested in garnering attention on a national stage. Some in my party may disagree with me. But we do have an opportunity and a need to be able to select those delegates, which is a complicated process, and it's nuanced, and maybe we don't all understand it, but our parties do understand that. And this April deadline gives us the ability to get ahead of those conventions. And so there are some details that are important in this process and why April matters. Senators, some of you are new. Welcome to the Senate. You are running every single day. Every vote you take on this floor, every debate that we have on this floor is not electioneering, but it is your record. It is your legislative record. And whether you are home knocking on doors, or whether you're answering phone calls here, or whether you're standing on this floor, that is part of your legislative record. And we are all always representing our district, and we are all always should be considering that as part of our process. And when you are an incumbent, you absolutely have an advantage, and sometimes a disadvantage, because people from home, whether or not it's an election year or whether or not it's a presidential primary year, may capitalize on what they see as a head start. That is the process. That is politics. And I just offer that as this is the solution that's in front of us to consolidate elections and to get voter turnout, which we say in every...
Okay, we are going to switch gears and just go check in on the House right now. Over in the House, Representative Bruce Skog is presenting a bill that would not allow abortion providers to provide sexual education materials in school. It's an interesting concept. I don't know if many people knew that this was happening, but as soon as we get that feed up for the House, we're going to switch gears, head over there, and just listen to that for a moment as we continue to watch the Senate. So let's do that.
Public tax dollars in public schools and universities for the promotion of abortion. However, there's a little bit of a loophole here that needs to be closed, in that other organizations that are abortionists can give free materials to the schools, and then that can be used. Now, it's not limiting in any way any content as far as what can be taught. It is limiting who can provide that. Keep in mind, abortion is against the law except for limited situations in our state, so it's a crime. The legitimizing influence greatly increases the chance that immature students will turn to organizations such as these for their future reproductive health concerns. Such an extracurricular relationship is very influential if we let these abortionists into our schools in any form by being able to teach or to bring the materials. And that does go on often with out-of-state entities that have ties within our state. So with that, I'd ask for your green light respectfully. Thank you.
For the motion, for debate on the motion. Hearing none, Gentleman 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate the bill.
Gentleman has the floor to debate the bill.
As the gentleman stated in his opening, there are still circumstances in which abortions are legal in this state. And when you pass a bill like this, prohibiting those who may be dealing with lawful abortions, then it seems like there's a infringement on free speech, and also it doesn't seem logical. If something is legal and lawful in part, then why would you then say, well, because there's another part that's illegal, why would you say, well, you can't talk to any of us about this because there's part of the abortion law that makes abortions illegal? This doesn't sound fair, it doesn't sound right, and it sounds very prejudicial and discriminatory against those who are acting lawfully. And that could be, in an emergency situation, maybe it would be one of our hospitals. So for that reason, I would encourage a no vote.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further debate on the motion? Hearing none. Gentlemen, 10 care to close debate. All right, debate's closed. Question is, House Bill 666 pass the House?
Okay, that's a quick debate. We will
Clerk will unlock the machine. Members will cast their votes.
we'll watch the vote here, I guess, since it just since we're here. But we want to go back to the Senate. Senator Ben Taves is up debating for a second time on this bill. This looks like that bill is going to
Has
pass
every member
handedly.
voted?
So let's yeah, that bill passes handily.
Does
So let's
any
go
member
back
wish
over
to
to the
change
Senate
their vote?
and watch Senator Ben Taves. They are debating Senate Bill 1371,
Number 2
which
in
is
May, if possible.
consolidating
But I'm
all of
not-
the primaries and moving them into April.
Don't see as a benefit to the constituents that I serve. So I understand that in the paper, actually I got a message yesterday that there will be a letter in the paper that I don't support primaries. And I find it sickening that these types of votes are used for those purposes. I'm not saying that's the intent of the sponsor at all. I want you to know that because it's other people that do that messaging. But I want you to know that it's a great concern to me that it's clear that I do support a primary over a caucus, and that I will support future legislation that would put it on the other dates that I mentioned. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate a second time.
Does anyone wish to debate the bill for the first time? Sarah Herndon, you're recognized to debate the bill for the second time.
Okay, I had to look at the electioneering communication law, and it says that any communication broadcast by television or radio, printed in a newspaper or on a billboard, directly mailed or delivered by hand to personal residences, or telephone calls made to personal residences, or otherwise distributed, so that would include emails, that unambiguously refers to any candidate within 30 days before a primary election. So for this year, that would be next Saturday, March 16th. Any communication that names anyone in this room, if we're a candidate, in the April 16th primary election that this would create for this year would qualify for reporting to the Secretary of State. So if someone named us, according to our electioneering communication statute 67-6602, and said, I've seen a lot from this about the senator from 23. I've gotten a whole bunch of emails. So if anybody paid any money to say, please support something that the senator from 23 is running and names him, they're going to have to report to the Secretary of State with this change, unless we do something with our definition of electioneering communication. So that's a significant downside of this legislation, in my opinion.
Is there further debate? Hearing none. Senator Guthrie, you're recognized to stand and close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President, Senators, for the good debate. I think this is an important issue, and I appreciate it stimulating the conversation in that direction. I guess I need to maybe take a little bit of exception with any insinuation that I'm bringing something to force somebody to take a vote. That's I'm disappointed that that's the perception of some. I think the senator from 27 laid out pretty well that the parties can still have a caucus. They're not tied to anything. They can still have a caucus. And when we talk about the physical note, I will call your attention to where it says when. It's when they have a separate primary. If they don't have it, then I believe the fiscal note is correct. As far as campaigning, senators, you're campaigning every single day of the year, as the senator from 9 said. And you probably, I disagree as far as getting home and all this and that. You could probably do a better job of campaigning right from here if you're doing the things that your constituents want. And as far as discussion of this issue with my constituents that some said it hasn't happened, virtually every meeting that I've been to through the course of the interim, this has come up, and my constituents want to be able to vote for their president because it's been an issue that I brought up to them, and they want to be able to take that vote. Right now, there's no presidential primary. So are we going to continue to argue over whether it's in March and the other ticket races are in May and pay that 2.7? Or are we still going to be at a stalemate and not put the March primary back in? I don't know. But I think this at least moves us to a point where we can still have relevance in the presidential elections, and those are different every year. Some years it goes late before somebody's determined. Some years, like this year, pretty well a foregone conclusion months ago. There was talk about the 30-day situation that Senator from 1 talked about. Well, was that applicable when the session didn't end a couple years ago? Went the whole year. We were in session the whole year. How many laws were broken during that cycle? What happens when the session goes into May? So that's a rule that is not exclusive to this particular consideration. I think it's been mentioned, you know, maybe not the be-all, end-all, maybe not the perfect solution, but I am committed to seeing what we can do to have our citizens be able to vote for their president. With that, Mr. President, debate is closed.
Debate is closed. The question before the Senate is, shall Senate Bill 1371 pass the Senate? The Secretary will poll the members.
Adams. Anthony. Burnt. Bjerke. Burtenshaw. Carlson. Cook. Den Hartog. Foreman. Grove. Guthrie. Harris. Hart. Hartkin. Herndon. Just. Blakey. Lee. Lenny. Lent. Nichols. Okonowitz. Robbie. Ricks. Ruckty. Schroeder. Semmelroth. Taylor. Taves. Trakel. Van Orden. Ward Engelking. Winder. Wintrow. Seiderveld. Herndon. Lenny. Trakel.
The vote count shows 23 in favor with 12 against, a majority having voted in
Okay.
the Senate Bill 1371.
So there it is.
passes the Senate.
1371 passes the Senate and will be transmitted to the House, as they say, where debate will continue. The Senate passes a bill that will consolidate the primary elections into one April date, mid-April. Mid-April. So if you were been watching since we opened the show, we've been listening to debate on both sides of this issue. I think one of the better arguments here And forgive me, real quick. I want to apologize. You know, we get a lot of comments that the volume is really low whenever we go to the House floor or the Senate floor, and then when we go to a break or I come back, that it really blows out your speakers. That is unintentional. It is not our fault. If you notice, the folks, when they stand up to debate, they're standing very far away from the microphone, and so there's only so much volume that we can get from the feed that is coming from PBS. So you know, they keep giving PBS more and more money, so maybe they can upgrade the system down there so we can hear properly when we're broadcasting on this. So that's just a quick technical note. That being said, what I find very fascinating about this bill is that it's happening a mere 6 days after the caucus, and you saw a few people stand up and say, "Hey, why are we doing this right now? You know, the next presidential primary won't be until 2028." So we have plenty of time to figure out when we do this. So the thing that's really being affected right now is the legislative primary, and moving that up into April. And so that appears to be perhaps what was intended here all along. We know that the reason why we are in this mess is because the governor signed a bill that got rid of the primary, the presidential primary. And that's how we got into this mess. So without that, we wouldn't be here. And even you saw Senator Anthony stand up and say, you know, had this bill come up, you know, a couple years prior, I probably would have voted against it because I like it in March. But now, seeing as how we don't have anything, let's put it in April. So that's where we're at. It passes the Senate. It still has to go through the House, and we will definitely keep tabs on that. And so forth. So thank you for joining us. It is March 8th. It's a Friday. I'm Matt Edwards. This is the Idaho Signal. We are going to take a quick break and get ready for the rest of the program here. We got a lot to get to. We'll be right back.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government and what we were tasked to do.
There's a saying in Idaho, Esto perpetua. It is forever. But the truth is, nothing lasts forever. Not without a fight. The Gem State is ours to fight for. It is ours to win. For life and liberty, for honesty and integrity. We ride together.
Okay, right now in the House, very active morning here. It's great. Back in the House, they're debating a bill that deals with cryptocurrency, digital assets. It's very fascinating debate happening there. Looks like Representative John Gannon is asking the sponsor of the bill, Representative Manwaring, a question. So let's listen into that.
Jump 29.
Mr. Speaker, that totally depends, gentleman from 17, on what it is. We had a company yesterday that we were talking to. They're not in Idaho, but they were giving an example of their operation. And they have 2,000 employees now. I think they're in New Hampshire, but they have 2,000 employees with very high salary jobs.
Jump 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And good gentleman.
Would the good gentleman from 29 yield to another question?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields. Jump 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2,000 jobs, are they involved in running the data center?
Gentleman from 29.
Mr. Speaker and good gentlemen, no, there's collateral jobs in the industry, right? So it depends on there's a lot of different paths these companies can take in what they do. So the example that in Eastern Idaho, for example, we have a company that's specifically working on agri-technology, right? So they would have a greenhouse and I think 100 to 150 acres of land and green. So they would have a farming operation, just like any other farming operation. They would have those farming jobs. So it depends on what they're doing. If they set up operations and they want to start doing AI computing and they're going to manage that data, there's jobs related to that. There's so many different angles. It could be 5 jobs. It could be 2,000 jobs. So I want to be clear that it runs the gamut like any other business.
Gentleman 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And will the gentleman yield for one more question?
The gentleman yields one more question that the gentleman from 17 doesn't know the answer to.
Yeah, I don't.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields.
Good gentleman, in your bill, you've indicated that the Uniform Consumer Credit Code is part of that these operations are going to be exempt from part of the Uniform Consumer Credit Code. And my concern is with those who might use cryptocurrency for illegal activities, and that there is not enough regulation of the cryptocurrency industry to control those illegal activities. Could you explain why we are exempting these operations from the Uniform Consumer Credit Code provisions that are referred to?
Gentleman 29.
Mr. Speaker, good gentleman, I'm going to take an assumption that you're talking about page 8, line 10. And I'm going to try to answer because that's the only reference I know that you're talking about treating these intangible assets differently. And the reason that this language is in here, if you're just using a digital asset as tender, then the best example I can give you is cash. If you are holding a dollar bill, we don't tax you because you're holding a dollar bill. So that's what this says. If you're holding this asset, you're not taxed just because you're holding personal property. And that's the reason it's in here.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentleman 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Follow-up question for the gentleman?
Gentleman 29, care to yield to an additional question?
One more, Mr. Speaker.
That raises...
Gentleman from 17, you may ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what kind of taxes are a company like this going to pay on the product, the digital product that they are dealing with?
Gentleman 29.
Mr. Speaker and good gentlemen, they pay taxes like any other business. So if there's a capital gains or loss, they pay that tax just like anybody else does when they buy and sell stock. That's been the federal law for several years now. They pay sales tax, they pay income tax, so they're not exempt from any other taxes. This is a protection for a private individual that if I hold a digital asset, just because I'm holding it, I'm not getting taxed on holding that private property.
Gentleman 10. Further debate on the motion.
Yes, I'll just comment on that.
Gentleman from 17,
debate.
would you like to debate the bill?
Thank you,
Floor
Mr.
to debate the bill.
I'm understanding, Mr. Speaker, and I do have a letter from the Tax Commission, which I have given to the good gentleman, that, and several people have, that there will not be a there will be a sales tax exemption if the data center has more than 30 employees and $250 million in investment.
Good gentleman, is that in this bill or is that in the current law?
It's in the current law.
Thank you,
And the Tax Commission is advised that it would be applicable to this bill.
Okay,
So
we're
there
going to
is
dip
that
out of
tax
this
exemption.
now as they continue to debate this bill. Fascinating, taking up digital currency and so forth. There's another bill dealing with Bitcoin, and I believe that is. Let me check my notes here. It might be sitting in. On the House. No, that was it. No, I don't know. There was another Bitcoin bill that had a hearing and is now, I think, in the amending order. I could be wrong, or it's moved along. Nevertheless, we had a ton of clips to get to today. One thing we had on yesterday was we were trying to get to Senator Scott Herndon. Since the Senate has adjourned in time for us to capture him, I believe he's making his way over to give himself the ability to join us. So let's set up what we're discussing here. Senate Bill 1374 deals with a property, being able to carry arms on public property when that property has been taken over, so to speak, or leased out or rented by a farmer's market or some sort of event that is happening that is open to the public. And so this all stems from an Idaho Supreme Court case up in Sandpoint that I believe Senator Herndon was a part of, and several other parties, where they attempted or tried basically they attempted to go into an event that was being held at a public park that had been leased out or rented, wearing firearms, and they were told that they could not, that firearms were not permitted on public property during this private event. And I'm sorry, I don't want to keep calling it a private event, because this is the whole point of the bill here. There's a lot of sparsing going on. The bill is being sent, I believe, to amending orders, or it was just amended, and so there's a lot of interesting details about this bill, and so that's why we wanted to invite Senator Herndon on to walk us through this. The bill was in a hearing, and we have several clips lined up to go through that. So why don't we take a quick break? We'll set up for that, and we'll keep an eye on this cryptocurrency bill for you. We'll see if we can capture the vote and let you know if you were engaged in that debate. But we will take a very short break, and we will be back right after this.
Spending this money surplus, which is not a surplus, it's an overcharging of the taxpayers.
All Idaho lawmakers swear an oath to support the Idaho and U.S. constitutions. But how's that working out for you? Because not all Idaho lawmakers share the same values. That's where the Citizens Alliance of Idaho Pledge comes in. 10 statements inspired by those two founding documents that are designed to preserve our shared values. Values such as education freedom, safeguarding free speech, defending our protected right to self-defense, and being responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. When a lawmaker signs the pledge, they are performing an act of political courage, accepting the challenge to be a champion for our values, and serving with political integrity. To find out if your lawmaker signed the pledge, visit idahopledge.com. Paid for by Citizens Alliance of Idaho. We ride together.
The reason this has come onto my radar is my case against the city of Sandpoint related to the festival at Sandpoint, which is a nonprofit corporation that runs an event every summer at War Memorial Field in Sandpoint. That is a city-owned park of the city of Sandpoint, so it is normally public property that is open to the public normally and habitually. However, when the Festival at Sandpoint holds their event, it is a ticketed event, so Senate Bill 1374 would not impact the Festival at Sandpoint whatsoever. In the Supreme Court case, Herndon versus Sandpoint, the finding was under the common law, Idaho has really relatively little actual statutory code related to your ability to carry guns and private property rights. We don't invade private property rights, and Senate Bill 1374 actually does not seek to invade private property rights. Under common law, what Herndon versus Sandpoint said is that when a city, a county, or any government entity contracts public property, whether it's a permit, a license, contract, or a lease, that imparts a private property right to that property for the duration of the lease. Idaho law is relatively unsophisticated as compared to other states. So if I look at a state like Georgia, there's actually nuance even in that. Georgia says it differentiates leases between what are called usufructs and what are called a lease that imparts an estate interest. So you could actually, the city of Sandpoint under Georgia law, if they were leasing War Memorial Field to the city of Sandpoint, the Georgia Supreme Court would say that does not impart a private property right. So just to let you know, there's nuance between the states. I'll also say on the First Amendment, and this is a differentiation between the First and Second Amendment, we have a Ninth Circuit federal case Gathright versus Portland, that even when an event contracts public property for purposes of the First Amendment, it doesn't abrogate the First Amendment. So Gathright was a gentleman who went to a private event on public property and was able to share his First Amendment speech. So that's why we entered into this area where we didn't know what the law said, and that's what Herndon versus Sandpoint was. Okay, so now getting to the legislation. What this addresses is public property that's normally public, and it gets used by a private entity. It could be for commercial purposes, or it could be a private event like a wedding by invitation only. So we have two goals here. One is to protect private property rights, and one is also to inform our gun owners around the state, and it's what our firearm preemption laws do, is that they can expect consistency, or at least clear notice as to where they can carry their weapons and where they cannot. So in the very simple change we're making, we say that a public property that is normally and habitually open to the public, that we want to look a little closer at the leases on that particular type of property that's normally and habitually open. And we say if a private group or a commercial group rents that property, so they get their private property right to that public property, and they have a private event by invitation only, or a commercial event that charges admission, or any other type of event, and this would be the amendment that we're making to it, with restricted access, whether admission is charged or not, then they have the ability to invoke on that normally, habitually, and open public property, they have the ability to invoke a restriction on the carry of firearms. That's what Senate Bill 1374 will still allow.
Okay,
What it
so
won't allow.
let's cut to another clip here as we wait Senator Herndon to join us. Senator Ben Taves had a question, a back and forth, and he wanted to bring some clarity to this, which we thought was really great. So let's watch that clip here. And I believe
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Packer. Thank you for testifying today. I've looked at this as I'll say a clarifying bill, just to make it really clear if you're carrying, when you're allowed to and when you're not allowed to. And it seems helpful to do that for someone, because I think that the vast majority of people that carry are law-abiding citizens. They want to stay within the law. So when I look at this on line 15, it says for any such private event or commercial event, it must appear to a reasonable person that the general public does not have unrestricted access to the designated public property, and so on. So I'm kind of having a hard time seeing what the problem is, only because from my point of view, we need to create clarity. And I don't think this is it doesn't appear to me to be a push to try to make sure that people can carry guns wherever they want. It's just making it clear where they can carry them and where they cannot carry them.
Director Packer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Taves. That part we don't have an issue with. We agree. We have no problem with clarifying that this is a restricted access area or it's not. I think that's reasonable, absolutely. But in some of the language in the bill, you are carving out that only in commercial ones that are ticketed, right, or that charge, or private events where invitations. Well, there are other parameters within the city on public properties that would not fit within those categories that we still would like to restrict access for firearms. Like, for example, in the case of a bike-a-thon.
Yeah.
Okay. Kelly Packer there. She represents a coalition of city administrators and mayors and all that stuff. So, oh my goodness, anytime people are coming out restricting, they want to restrict your right to self-defense and to keep yourself safe. I can't stand it. I just can't stand it. I can't stand it. I can't stand it. Okay. Herndon closed this hearing with a should we play Kelly Packer's earlier comment? I mean, is that even worth it at this point to listen to this debate about public safety? And I mean, this is the whole point is public safety. An armed society is a polite society. By saying there are no guns allowed at this private event, or there's no guns allowed at this school, there's no guns allowed here, there's no guns allowed there, you can't have guns here, you can't have guns there. The only people who abide by those are law-abiding citizens. If a criminal with a weapon or a maniac with a firearm, they're not looking. They're not going to adhere to those restrictions. In fact, they're seeking out those restrictions because they know when they get there, they're going to be met with very little resistance, if any. If any. So it's ridiculous. And I know most of you out there agree with me. It's ridiculous, but all these nanny staters do is try to restrict your rights. Offensive. Okay, let's listen to Herndon close out this bill hearing. This was from a few days ago. It did go through the amending order. I've got some notes on that. It did go through the amending order. So this bill is slowly moving along. It's slowly moving along. But let's hear Herndon's closing after all the people came on to attack this bill and attack this idea or support it. Herndon did end up with a few comments at the end here. So let's listen to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very succinct. The original version here, Senate Bill 1374, has the NRA's support. They have just gotten the proposed amendment as you have. We have worked with them extensively on this bill. Just speaking to Art in the Park, chances are there are people armed there today. So my opinion is this doesn't actually change anything that's happening in Idaho. However, following the Supreme Court case, it does add clarity as to what the property owners would have to do. The reasonable person standard is a pretty well-known standard. If we start adding all kinds of regulations like signs, that would look like we're pretty well over-regulating the space, and we're probably going to miss things and include things that maybe shouldn't have been included or shouldn't have been missed. And so I like the reasonable person standard, gives deference to the organizers of events and local cities and counties. And with that, I ask your support to send this to the 14th order for possible amendment.
Senator Lee.
Okay, let's all thank the good Lord for Senator Scott Herndon, his statesmanship, his ability to hone in on the right arguments, the ability to keep things together and to move things forward in a very reasonable fashion. It's very reasonable arguments. Much better than anything that I can do sitting behind this microphone. It's really great to see the statesmen that stand up for this stuff. So we only have a few minutes left in the broadcast. And as you know, we put out these invites. Sometimes the Senate goes at ease. Sometimes they adjourn in time for folks to make it over to our program. Sometimes they continue going long. Over in the House, they're still debating this cryptocurrency or digital asset stuff that's going on there. We got Representative Dale Hawkins speaking on this. So there's definitely always a lot of action. Today, we wanted to touch upon House Bill 506. We had Melissa Radford from the Coeur d'Alene Vacation Rental Homes Alliance. They were discussing short-term rentals. We had a lot of stuff in a committee that hearing that happened yesterday on this bill. There was a lot of stuff going on. Also in the House Judiciary Committee yesterday, Judiciary and Rules, was House Bill 668, which dealt with public money going towards gender reassignment surgery. Public money going towards that. That was hotly debated, and there was a lot of great folks that came in to support that bill. Both of those bills are moving forward, so that's good news. At least, slowly, but they're moving forward. Yesterday, the House passed a ton of bills. One thing that went down was House Bill 602, which we watched a little bit in hearing. House Bill 602 was wanted to prevent the use of public money going towards teacher unions, and that did not happen. That bill went down. Later in the day, they tried to make a motion to reconsider the vote on that bill. And we had a clip from that we can probably get to next week if things don't take other precedents. And I promised you yesterday that House Bill 522, the cannibalism bill, that was going through. I want to leave you with that because I promised you that we would touch upon that. There was an interesting exchange, and I take the side of Heather Scott in this. Do we have that clip with Heather Scott and Ilana Rebel presenting the cannibalism bill. We're going to leave you with that. We'll play that out, and then we will see you next week on Monday. We'll try and get on the air then. So let's throw it to Heather and Alana on the cannibalism bill, and we'll see you next week.
House Bill 522 expands the criminal definition of cannibalism to include willfully putting it into food or drink. Willfully, the definition is if done voluntarily or unintentionally with a specific intent to do something that the law forbids. This bill passed out of 2 committees by unanimous consent, and I ask for your green light.
Thank you, lady. You've heard the motions. For the debate against or for the motion. Good lady from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to debate the bill.
Good lady has the floor to debate the bill.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I know we're all very hungry. We've had a lot of meaty bills today that we can really sink our teeth into, so I'm just going to nibble around the edges of this one. Truthfully, I'm really not sure this bill is fully cooked, because I think the instances of secondary fraudulent cannibalism in this state are really rare, or at most medium rare.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I object. I object.
Good lady from 2.
This
lady
is
from 18.
very serious topic, and I understand it can make people feel uncomfortable, but I don't think making fun of this situation is a good thing. It is a crime in Idaho, and we're just expanding that criminal definition. So,
good lady from 18, while we enjoy your humor, try to be
I will briefly wrap up. Just one final note. While I would prefer this bill were served with fava beans and a nice Chianti, I understand the lady's just trying to take a bite out of crime, so I will give this my green light.
So that's debate in favor of the bill.
This bill, I think, it puts a stake in the ground that says we have a sovereign right to protect what's ours.